I'm Andrea Lee Matthews, writer, photographer, and clairvoyant medium, and this is the Bold, Brave Woman Project. This podcast is a living, breathing unfolding of what it really means to step into our becoming. Born from the ashes of a failed YouTube channel, this weekly podcast brings you real, unfiltered moments of failure, of bravery, and of deep intuitive knowing so that you too can step into who you're becoming with even more trust and bravery. Let's dive in. Welcome back to another episode of the Bold, Brave Woman Project. Today, I thought I would share with you my podcasting journey. Because when I was reflecting on it the other day, I could see how when I first started out with my podcasting, it was actually coming from a really strong desire to do something meaningful, but driven heavily by fear. Now, first, I want to take you back. So, I'm going to take you back to my childhood to paint a bit of a picture as to what my journey with my voice has been like, as well as my relationship with being seen and being heard and being in my authority, through to now, through to this podcast and some of the learnings and the lessons that I've had along the way. So when I think right back, and I had a chat with my mom recently just to get a bit of insight from her perspective of what I was like when I was younger. Apparently, when I was really small, I was quite vivacious. I was quite creative and quite chatty. I would stroll up to strangers and strike up conversations. I was unencumbered and free. But as I grew up and things in societal conditioning like stranger danger, parents were encouraged back then, and I know they are now, to teach children not to speak to strangers, to fear all the things that do occur in our society. This conditioning started to filter down into me. And my mum said there was a dramatic shift between walking up and chatting fearlessly to strangers to becoming quite reserved and becoming quite fearful. And as I moved through puberty and social expectation and trying to fit in, particularly at primary school, self-esteem and body issues became quite a big thing for me that I started to hide even more. I started to pull back. A girlfriend of mine and I, we used to love creating these little dances and performances with costumes, and we would knock on the doors of other classrooms in the school, and we'd ask to put on a little performance for the class. And when we were quite small, this was great fun and we loved it. But as we got older, and bullying starting to come into play, judgment, the kids just making fun of us. As I kind of moved into that 10-year-old, 11, 12-year-old age period, I also started to gain weight. And when I reflect back, I used to sneak a lot of food because I was using food to cope with stress. And so between withdrawing from society and trying to become invisible, eating my feelings, my weight gain increased, which then increased the bullying and the teasing and the exclusion, which then fueled this cycle of pulling back even more and eating even more. That it actually, at that very young age, created not only self-esteem and poor body image issues, but at the beginnings of an eating disorder, a binge eating disorder, which later turned into bulimia. And here's the thing, even with all of this on board, there was still a strong undercurrent of creativity that existed within me. I was lucky enough that from an educational perspective, my parents allowed me to take some multimedia subjects, which opened the door for me to filmmaking, to digital audio production, to creating my own films. But because I had these self-esteem issues still on board, I made sure I executed this from behind the camera. Instead of being the one performing or dancing, it felt much safer for me to explore my creativity from behind the lens. Always directing, always producing, always writing, but never performing. It didn't feel safe to perform anymore. And as my self-esteem issues and my body dysmorphia grew into bulimia and really struggling, my need to step back further and further progressed. That eventually, even although I went on to study multimedia and filmmaking, and I worked in film and television for quite a number of years, this feeling of not being worthy, of not wanting to be seen, of not being good enough overtook that I stepped away from it completely. And it actually took me a really long time and a number of careers, which I described in the earlier episode, to find my way back to opening the doors of creativity again. And there was a lot of trauma and conditioning and beliefs that I had to decode along the way. There was one point where I'd convinced myself that I wasn't creative. That I just wasn't creative. I'd lost my ability to paint. I'd lost my ability to write. Wasn't even journaling at the time. Like, I couldn't even pick up a pen. There was such worthlessness and such devaluing that had happened in my mind about my value and who I was, that had really put up this incredible block between myself and my creativity. And so I spent most of my career moving in and out of different science or math or strategic based careers until the COVID pandemic hit. And this was really interesting because I had been suppressing this creative side of me for decades by this point. I had gone through significant health challenges based on all of the damage that I had done with my eating disorders. I was even misdiagnosed as bipolar there by a medical professional at one point and popped on a whole bunch of different bipolar regulating medication. I was basically sedated for a significant period of my life. But it wasn't until the pandemic that I really decided to dig in and start to change my life. I decided to take my life back, to take control of how I was feeling and the conditioning that was making me feel and think and act in these certain ways, and to start to excavate and uncover who it was that I really was. And so, with a brave leap of faith, I decided to get off my medication. Of course, I was medically supported in that decision, to start to tap into my spirituality and my nature as a psychic medium, as a channeler. I started to reawaken the gifts that I'd always had, starting with kinesiology and EFT tapping to really strip back all of these layers and these masks of the person that I had become, to uncover who it was that I truly was underneath. And through this, I realized two very, very important things. One is that I had this deep desire to be in service to others. And that was really evident in a lot of the career changes that I had made. Every time I got overwhelmed in my marketing and sales career, I would always go and retrain in something that was in service, whether it was in nursing or whether it was in teaching. I would always find myself gravitating to doing something that was in service. And I knew deep down, once I'd stripped back a lot of this conditioning and the shoulds and the expectations that I'd placed on myself, that making my life be more than just making money for others or climbing the corporate ladder, to do something that was actually meaningful and enabled me to get to the end of my life and look back and be like, I lived a life that was not only in service of others, but was meaningful and purposeful and made a difference. And the second thing that started to reveal itself very, very quickly was that I wanted to reignite and reconnect with my creativity and my creative side. That side of me that had been there since I was a little girl, but got suppressed and compressed under trauma and under expectation of what was good and what was successful. When I started to realize these two things, I was in a massive transitional period in my life where I was stepping out of a relationship that was no longer in the highest of my health and in the highest of my good. I had had the beautiful opportunity to be a stepmom to a beautiful little boy. And stepping away from that relationship meant leaving him behind and taking off that hat that I'd worn for almost a decade as a stepmom and putting it to the side and no longer having that relationship anymore. It was such a tumultuous time of, who am I if I'm not a stepmother? if I'm not in this relationship, or wanting to have the life that I had just fixated on building for such a long time. Who am I and where am I and what am I going to do next? And as I transitioned out of that relationship, I had to sell the home that I had worked so hard to build and move into my own place. I changed careers at the same time. I transitioned from one corporate organization into another because I just needed to clean slate on all levels. And soon after all of this transitional period into this new career and this new place, COVID hit. And that changed everything in that it really slowed everything down. I was fortunate in that my work was able to continue. But like all of us, everything else, all of the distractions, all of the extracurricular stuff stopped. I had all of this time to really reflect on who am I, where am I, and what do I want to do. I started to paint, I started to draw, and this amazing idea, which I'd never had up until this point, to create a podcast popped into my mind. But I wanted it not to just be a podcast for the sake of a podcast. I wanted it to be meaningful. And I had been doing a lot of reading at the time around racism and systemic privilege. I thought, I know, I'm going to create a podcast that invites voices of people of color onto the podcast to open up channels of communication around where we're actually getting it wrong and what we could actually do differently to start to address some of these problems. So I created the very first live stream podcast with a video feed into Facebook for a show called Life in Contradiction. And each week I would live stream an episode with a guest who would come on and talk about their experiences with racism and starting to hold the conversation of what could change. And this project, honestly, it changed my life. There was something about holding space for difficult conversations that really fueled me. And I realized that I loved creating space for stories to be told, for asking hard questions, for people really challenging my point of view. I realized very quickly that creating these kinds of platforms and spaces and conversations was what I really wanted to do. And whilst Life in Contradiction only had one season and it was mainly ended because I ended up in a major health crisis that resulted in some major surgery, that feeling never left me. The surgery that I had to have was actually a hysterectomy. And it had taken me on this pathway of 1 minute I'm a woman with all of the complete body parts, to having to swallow the fact that the body parts and the things that made up a woman and a mother were no longer going to be there, and dealing with the emotional fallout of that. And I had already, as I'd mentioned, been on such a tumultuous journey with my body to realize that we don't talk about the journeys of our bodies a lot. And all of a sudden, I'm laid up on the couch in this recovery period. Why don't I create a podcast that creates space for women to come on and talk about the journeys that they have with their bodies? Everything, the good, the bad, the hard, the unspoken. And so Body Diaries was born. And I set about reaching out to women right across the world to see if there was anyone who had had a journey with their body that they wanted to come and share and talk about the things that helped them get through. And that was an incredible podcast. We had so many different women talk about all sorts of journeys, everything from escaping domestic violence and alcoholism to overcoming eating disorders and even managing and living with adult ADHD. It was a beautiful podcast, and don't worry, that podcast is still around. It is going to be back in its second season very soon. But it took me on this journey of realizing that stories matter. And the most interesting thing about Body Diaries is that it started to awaken in me this desire to start stepping into being seen again. It was amazing how using your voice and telling stories, being brave enough to finally tell those stories into a microphone, just chips away another layer of fear that we put on ourselves about speaking up. And it opened the door of this curiosity that I had about, well, what if I was to explore being seen and performing and being on stages? And so soon after Body Diaries launched, I became very curious about taking some improv classes. And improv led to acting, led back to improv, led back to more performance. And before I knew it, I had overcome this fear of being seen by putting myself out there, by starting to allow the world to see me on stages. I got better at showing up on social media, on video, and sharing my thoughts and feelings. That soon I realized I wanted to do more than just have podcasts. I was ready to not be hiding behind the microphone or behind the camera anymore. Part of my journey and part of my destiny is to be seen, is to share, is to be on stages, and is to be on screens. And I wanted to share this because what can feel as a fear and as hiding can transform into something incredible and beyond even more than what you think. If you had have told me that one day I would be declaring to the world that I wanted to have my own show and be a host, back when I was stuck in the eating disorder, in the dysmorphia, in the feeling of not being good enough and hating being in my body, I would have called you crazy. I would have said, no way. Like, I can't see that. I can't feel that. That just feels impossible. And it is absolutely categorically not what I want. Because at the time, I was in that frequency of hiding, of being contracted, and allowing my fears to rule the frequency that I was in. Whereas now, through the journey of all of the healing that I've done, it feels possible. But not just possible, it feels desirable. And so if you've got a project that you want to start at whatever level that you're at right now, if it's just speaking to a microphone, if it's showing up on camera, if it's writing a book and putting everything into the words right now because you're not ready to be seen, do it. Embrace it, because it will open the door to the healings that are needed for you to then step into the full potential of who you are. That next chapter, that next level of expression of creativity. Because within you, no matter how suppressed it is, no matter when it got shaken out of you, creativity and expression exists and it lives. It's just waiting for you to find the channels to open the door, to let the light in enough for it to be stirred up and vibrated and poured out, to then lead to the next thing and the next thing and the next thing. I'm personally really excited to see where this chapter flows for me. And I can guarantee you that wherever I end up in the next 12 months, 24 months, 5 years, 10 years, it is going to be even further and even bigger than what I can see right now. But what I promise and commit to myself to doing is to continue to dream, to continue to hold visions and ideas of expansion for myself, because every step I take allows just that little bit more creativity and expansion in, which then can catapult us to destinations even beyond our wildest dreams. So, if you have been looking for a reinforcement to go and do that thing, take that first step or even the 50th step further into your creativity and expression, here it is. And of course, I want to hear all about it. I want to hear about the dream. I want to hear about the steps and the progressions and the bold moves. So please reach out to me, send me a DM, send me an email. I want to celebrate you, because taking those steps is really bold and it takes so much courage to keep going and to not let the fear overtake you. So the more I can celebrate you, to put more energy and excitement behind you to keep flying forward, that makes me so happy. And it is something that I would just love to be able to do in service of you. And I cannot wait to see you in the next episode. As always, thank you for being here. If this episode stirred something for you and you want to book a channeled reading, jump on the link in the show notes. There's only a few channeled reading sessions available each week. And of course, you can reach out to me anytime on my main Instagram handle at andy.matthews, or follow all of my art and photography on my art feed at path&9 on Instagram. If you're not in there yet and you want to get into the private Telegram space where all of these audios drop every day, as well as all the art, the conversation, and the behind the scenes, go to www.andrealeematthews.com/private podcast. You can also follow me on Instagram at Andrea Lee Matthews, and you can find more about me and all of my work at andrealeematthews.com. I'll see you in the next transmission.